Good morning, and good to see you all here today. So, for the past few weeks, we've been discussing Dogen's writing, the four methods of guidance for the Bodhisattva. If the Bodhisattva is to, as they say, save all beings, how is one to proceed? And there's four elements that Dogen cites. One is kind speech. One is generosity, another beneficial action. And the one we'll discuss today is he refers to as identity action. It's a translation of the word Dogen, which must be a little awkward to translate because identity action is kind of an awkward phrase in English. He says that identity action is non-difference. In a way, kind of non-discrimination. And like much of Dogen's writings and also much of Buddhist writings, it's largely about how we perceive things, what our worldview is, how we take in our experience. And I'll be reading what Dogen wrote about identity action, but I'd like to start perhaps a little far afield. But I found an interesting, I guess, connection or analogy here. There was a physician and neuroscientist, Ian McGilchrist, on the radio, and he was talking about really his life study, which is the structure and function of the human brain, and in particular, how the two hemispheres differ and how they relate to one another, the left and right hemispheres of the brain. So hearing his talk on the radio, I was intrigued, and I ordered a book of his from the library. It's 600 pages of carefully annotated and referenced text. So I'm not sure I'll get through the whole book, but his main thesis is fairly clear, and he repeats it on multiple occasions throughout the book. An example I'll read here, where again he is talking about the left and right hemispheres of the brain and how they function differently. He says, I suggested there were two ways of being in the world, both of which were essential. One was to allow things to be present to us in all their embodied particularity, with all their changeability and impermanence, their interconnectedness, as part of a whole, which is forever in flux. In this world, we too feel connected to what we experience, part of that whole, not confined in subjective isolation. From a world that is viewed as objective, Now, the other way was to step outside the flow of experience and experience our experience in a special way, to represent the world in a form that is less truthful, but apparently clearer, and therefore cast in a form which is more useful for manipulation of the world and one another. This world is explicit, abstracted, compartmentalized, fragmented, static, though its bits can be reset in motion like a machine. Essentially lifeless. From this world, we feel detached, but in relation to it, we are powerful. I believe the essential difference between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere is that the right hemisphere pays attention to the other. Whatever it is that exists apart from ourselves, with which it sees itself in profound relation. It is deeply attracted to and given life by the relationship, the betweenness that exists with the other. By contrast, the left hemisphere pays attention to the virtual world that it has created, which is self-consistent, but self-contained, ultimately disconnected from the other, making it powerful, but ultimately only able to operate on and to know itself. McGilchrist, in other parts of the text, notes that not only humans, but animals have this asymmetry of brain function and structure, as a matter of fact, with structural differences between the left and the right hemisphere, not exact mirror images. And he illustrates this by talking about birds. So a bird feeding at a feeder incorporates this focused left hemisphere function on identifying food, identifying seeds, focusing on manipulation of the seeds for nourishment. But at the same time, or at least alternately, the right hemisphere is aware of the 360-degree view, the open awareness, which is necessary because there may be a hawk around or a cat. So the bird, while feeding, needs to also be aware of its total surroundings, so that both functions, that focused attention and that open, wide 360-degree attention, are essential for the bird's survival. McGilchrist is trying to make the point that we also have different ways of perceiving, and that both of these different ways are useful and, in fact, essential for us with our survival. So now I'll return to Master Dogen in talking about identity action. Identity action means non-difference. It is non-difference from self, non-difference from others. For example, in the human world, the Tathagata took the form of a human being. From this, we know that he did the same in other realms. When we know identity action, others and self are one. Lute, song, and wine are one with human being. Deva and spirit being. Human being is one with lute, song, and wine. Lute, song, and wine are one with lute, song, and wine. Human being is one with human being. Deva is one with Deva. Spirit being is one with spirit being. To understand this is to understand identity action. Action means right form, dignity, correct manner. This means that you cause yourself to be in identity with others after causing others to be in identity with you. However, the relationship of self and others varies limitlessly with circumstances. The Guanzi says, the ocean does not exclude water. That is why it is large. Mountain does not exclude earth. That is why it is high. A wise Lord does not exclude people. That is why he has many subjects. That the ocean does not exclude water is identity action. Water does not exclude the ocean either. This being so, water comes together to form the ocean. Earth piles up to form mountains. My understanding is that because the ocean itself does not exclude the ocean, it is the ocean and it is large. Because mountains do not exclude mountains, they are mountains and they are high. Because a wide Lord does not weary of people, his subjects assemble. Subjects means nation. Wise Lord means ruler of the nation. A ruler is not supposed to weary of people. Not to weary of people does not mean to give no reward or punishment. Although a ruler gives reward and punishment, he does not weary of people. In ancient times, when people were uncomplicated, there were neither legal reward nor punishment in the country. The concept of reward and punishment was different. Even at present, there should be some people who seek the way without expecting a reward. This is beyond the understanding of ignorant people. Because a wise Lord understands this, he does not weary of people. People form a nation and seek a wise Lord, but as they do not know completely the reason why a wise Lord is wise, they only hope to be supported by the wise Lord. They do not notice that they are the ones who support the wise Lord. In this way, the principle of identity action is applied to both a wise Lord and all the people. This being so, identity action is a vow of bodhisattvas. With a gentle expression, practice identity action for all people. So, just going back through this a bit.
Will, what was that source again? This is a great passage.
Yeah, that is from the Bodhisattva's Four Methods of Guidance by Ehe Dogen. And I'm using the translation of Tanahashi, which is in a book, The Moon in a Dewdrop. It's actually published by the I'm not sure. Um, anyway, it's available through the San Francisco Zen Center. Yeah, so yeah, it's complicated, and it might seem to sort of scatter all over the place, but I'm glad you found it helpful, Jim. And we'll go through some of the features in it, and then at the end break up and discuss more in smaller groups. So identity action means non-difference. In a way, I guess I kind of relate this to the passage I was reading from McGilchrist about the different functions of mind, with the left hemisphere being the discriminatory mind, the mind that breaks things into parts, analyzes them, and the right hemisphere being the more holistic mind, the mind that can see the big picture. Uh, he goes into this thing about lute, song, and wine, which may be confusing, but it refers to a poem that was apparently well known at the time by a Chinese poet. And the poem is rather short, so I will read it. It's by Bo Yo-chan. Who are the three comrades? Lute stops playing. Wine is raised up. When wine is finished, a song is sung. The three comrades lead one another, going round and round endlessly. Who are the three comrades? Lute stops playing. Wine is raised up. When wine is finished, a song is sung. The three comrades lead one another, going round and round endlessly. So lute, song, and wine are all part of the evening's experience. And yes, we can identify the separate elements there, but they're all part of that experience, and any one of them is connected with the other. So what that reminded me of, I'll relate briefly. Um, uh, Growing up, my father was in the army, and we moved frequently. And in those days, moving involved getting in the car and driving for long distances. And we would, so there would be the three children in the back seat. And cars were not as big as they used to be, as they are now. So it was rather cramped. Three children in the back seat, and my parents up front. And of course, periodically we would stop for a meal. And my parents would joke about how the three of us would, after a meal, we would sing songs for a little while, and then we would go to sleep. So it was like meal, songs, sleep, and all that was part of the experience. Each element supported the other in a way. And so lute, song, and wine. Action means right form, dignity, correct manner. You caused yourself to be in identity with others. It implies a certain intention here, a certain cultivation. It takes a certain amount of energy to bring yourself to this state, to bring yourself to this mode of perception, to, in a way, if we're going back to this left hemisphere, right hemisphere thing, to sort of jog yourself out of the left hemisphere, the instrumental mind, the mind that is manipulative, to the mind that is seeing the whole scene. The non-discriminatory mind, the mind that places you in relationship to everything. And the implication is that you can cultivate this ability. And I think meditation is a means for accomplishing that. Meditation specifically frustrates the manipulative, the instrumental mind by stopping it. Ideas and impulses arise, but we just let them go. We don't get up and do something. And then he goes on to talk about this passage from the Guanzi, which is beautiful, I think. The ocean does not exclude water. That is why it is large. And then talks about mountains. The Guanzi was an ancient text from, at least by some accounts, that dates back to the 7th century BCE from China. And like many of the ancient texts, it offered some instruction for leaders as to how to comport themselves and how to be a wise leader. The ocean does not exclude water. That is why it is large. And a wise lord does not exclude people. That is why he has many subjects. And then there's this passage about people form a nation and seek a wise lord, not really perhaps understanding that they are in fact the ones supporting the wise lord as he or she supports them. That is an interrelationship. When people lose track of this and see the wise lord as a master and the subjects as slaves, then civilizations deteriorate. And actually, McGilchrist kind of goes into this towards the end of his book, talking about how he thinks that as a society, we have become too left hemisphere dominant, instrumental, manipulative, not seeing the big picture. Dogen concludes, with a gentle expression, practice identity action for all people. A more literal translation of this that I got from elsewhere, I found is kind of moving. It says, we should face all things only with gentle faces. We should face all things only with gentle faces. So that is the fourth of the guidances for the Bodhisattva. Identity action, how we perceive the world, how we view things. So I would be interested in, any thoughts about well, what about this rings true or not? And do can you see these two different modes of perception? Can you think of examples of them just in your daily activities? And what are your thoughts? Have we become too left hemisphere dominant? Do you agree with Ian McGilchrist in that way? So I'll stop there, and we can break up into groups and then come back together and see what thoughts you have about these passages in a few minutes. Thank you very much for listening.